And today I'm very honored to introduce the special guest joining the discussion on current affairs with me, Colonel Richard Black. Colonel Richard Black was the former chief at the Army Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon, a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, and later Virginia Senate. He served for 31 years in the U.S. Marine and the U.S. JAG Corps. I will let Colonel Richard Black to tell us more about his background and his experience in the military. And now, Colonel Richard Black, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'll just add to my introduction. I like to make it very clear to people when I'm doing these interviews that, I'm very much an American patriot. I fought in Vietnam. I risked my life literally hundreds of times. I joined the 1st Marine Division. I fought 70, often very bloody, combat patrols. I was wounded, and my 2 radio men were killed right beside me, literally within arm's reach in one case. And so then I had a split career where the first half was spent in the United States Marine Corps, and then the second half I was an Army Judge Advocate officer, which is a lawyer. We have an organization within the military that enforces the law, that prosecutes crimes, that handles litigation and things like that. And I was very senior in the ranks. I had a very successful career as an Army lawyer, and I ended up in the Pentagon, where I was the head of the Criminal Law Division, and I advised the Senate Armed Services Committee on matters of national importance, and I testified before Congress on a number of occasions and prepared executive orders for signature of the President of the United States. So I am very dedicated to the people who serve in the armed forces of the United States, but I have rather grave misgivings about some of our foreign policy. I think starting back, particularly in the time of George Bush, President George Bush, I think we began to take a rather radical direction, and we became overly involved in military action. And I have not supported many of those actions, and some of them I'm very, very strongly opposed to, such as the war in Ukraine and such as the war to overthrow the government of Syria. I think that some of the direction that we are taking relative to China is unnecessarily provocative. And I think the unfortunate thing is that while there may be some very wealthy globalists around the world who benefit enormously from hostilities and conflict, neither the Chinese nor the American people gain anything from this escalation of tensions between the countries. So anyway, that's a little bit of my background, and I appreciate you having me on today.
First, I want to discuss with you the situation in Afghanistan, because it has been exactly 1 year since the United States withdrew its troops in Afghanistan. But the humanitarian crisis in this country is severe on many levels. For example, millions of Afghans are facing acute food insecurities. So I'm wondering, how do you make the 20 years of U.S. involvement in this country since 2001 in the aftermath of 9/11? And how do you make the U.S. foreign policies towards Afghanistan?
The policy of going into Afghanistan was disastrous. We went in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. And we know that there were al-Qaeda forces that were training in remote parts of Afghanistan. It was certainly legitimate to attack those camps. I supported the attack on those camps right after 9/11. But what we did not need to do was to occupy the country. We went in there with very little sense of direction about what our purpose was. And it's really very revealing that the Secretary of Defense at that time, Donald Rumsfeld, sent notes to his people sometime after we had put a very large military force on the ground in Afghanistan. And he inquired, he said, just who are we fighting? He didn't know who the enemy was in Afghanistan. He knew that we had all of these troops there, but even the Secretary of Defense did not understand the mission in Afghanistan. So we were there for 20 years, and during the entire 20 years, this has always been a puppet government. The collapse of the Afghan government was inevitable. And very few people think about this, but had the Afghan army fought with great courage and so forth, there would have been an enormous amount of bloodshed in Afghanistan after we left. The soldiers would have been killed on our side. The Taliban would have been killed on the other side. No doubt in the aftermath of that type of war, there would have been enormous retribution against civilians who fought on one side or the other. So to my mind, looking at it in a very dispassionate way, I think it was a tremendous blessing that the government folded immediately. The army collapsed almost immediately, and as a result of that, we avoided enormous. I say we, the world, avoided enormous bloodshed and suffering in Afghanistan that would have taken place had the army actually put up a stiff defense. So I think if we look at it with pure logic, we'll arrive at that understanding that the best thing in the world, if they were going to lose anyway, was to lose quickly, to lose with very little bloodshed. So the government and the army were always a mere facade. They weren't really legitimate in any sense of the word. The government folded the instant that we stopped propping it up. But it's important to remember that Afghanistan historically is the graveyard of nations. The British went in, and their armies were almost slaughtered to a man as they withdrew. The Soviet Union went in, and after very bitter fighting, they were forced to withdraw. Mm-hmm. And then the United States went in, and I think we can sort of thank our lucky stars that we didn't suffer more grievously than what we did. And we got out in relatively good shape, except for the fact that this, along with all of these other wars that we've been fighting, are simply devouring our financial strength. And it's also hurting us in terms of our foreign relations. But I think it is a very good thing that we are out of Afghanistan. There was a special report, an investigative report that analyzed the reasons for the collapse of Afghanistan, and the report said, well, we didn't train them right. We withdrew our contractors too rapidly. But if we had stayed 50 years instead of 20, the government still would have been illegitimate. And the moment that we left, it still would have collapsed. And the only difference is that we would have padded the Swiss bank accounts of all of these arms dealers and crooked politicians more so than we did in 20 years.
But another thing is the Biden administration freezes the $7 billion assets of Afghanistan. And I think many countries are demanding that these assets needs to be returned to Afghanistan, especially when the people are suffering from earthquake, natural disasters, hunger, the basic needs. And yet I think Biden administration used the excuse that they will use half of the assets to help the victims of the family members of the victim of 9/11. But I think I saw news that even the family members of the victims said this is illegitimate, immoral for us to use this money. So they don't want to use the money. To me, this is immoral and absurd on many levels, that you are freezing the assets that belongs to a country and actually they need the money the most right now. So they are punishing the Afghan people collectively for 9/11. Like, none of the hijackers are actually from Afghanistan, but right now the normal civilians, the normal Afghans are suffering from these punishments. This punishment towards civilians is, to me, is unacceptable. What's your thoughts?
Well, I'm very familiar with the victims of 9/11. I've been in touch with the leaders from there. They've actually been supporters of mine when I was in political office. Wonderful people, and it's very convenient for the government, for the U.S. government, to say, "Oh, well, here, we'll give you this money. You take money from these people," and this is not money that belongs to the Taliban. It's not money that belongs to the previous government. It's money that belongs to the people of Afghanistan. Now, some have said it's $7 billion. Originally, they were saying $9 billion. I suspect $9 billion is more accurate. But it's a very, very difficult political situation. Even if the Biden administration wants to return that money to Afghanistan, the Republicans will immediately attack them savagely. They won't say, "Well, you're giving this back to the Afghan people that soldiers died ostensibly fighting for all these years." No, they'll say, "You're giving it to the Taliban that we fought against." It's very, very difficult for the Biden administration to do this. If it were Trump, if it were President Trump in office today, he would find it very difficult to overcome the political problem. It's sort of a political dilemma for whichever party tries to release the funds. I wish it could be done. I hope that someone finds a way to do it. It is important for us to realize that whether it's $7 billion or $9 billion, that's not going to support Afghanistan for very long. The United States and other countries were pouring vast sums of money into Afghanistan before we withdrew. Enormous sums that dwarf the $7 or $9 billion. But I think you're correct. It's money that belongs to the people. We should release it to the people. I hope someone finds a way. But I think it's important as realists to understand that the political dilemma of releasing is very, very difficult.